Despite having all the available resources and control methods, the organisation of disaster response and relief often breaks down due to human error and politicisation of management systems. This leads to disorganisation and chaos and reactive relief setups once the conditions have spiralled out of control. Design disaster relief should not answer a question about how we should act in disasters, but rather, how can we prevent what we should do from breaking down because of the human error in governance and organisation? COVID has evoked a new opportunity to reconceptualise an approach to infrastructure itself and its role in urban disaster resilience. So let's look at the Melbourne CBD, where the city's higher population density naturally creates a higher risk of worsened disaster effects. If we examine the north of the CBD, we can identify a string of hospitals and medical facilities, and their emergency bays, that can be synthesised into disaster relief. Combining this with accommodation, markets and supermarkets, emergency services, public toilets, and car parks that can be used for storage space for both infrastructure and generators, this scheme strategically identifies a resulting physical strip that becomes an amalgamated corridor of essential disaster services. This is where flexible, systematic infrastructure that would be designed in detail by industrial designers can be placed. The landscape architectural proposition is for the infrastructural corridor itself as a system. Its physicality can become a more politically and socially proactive value, embedded into the urban city and used as a way of enforcing and administering new systematic disaster responses in order to lessen the element of human error. In order to effectively respond to disasters, this corridor will comprise of an interweaving of the permanent and the adaptable. This is because different disasters occur across different timescales. Permanent infrastructure is a constant that will exist within the corridor at all times, ready to be activated, whereas adaptable infrastructure might permanently exist but be formatted differently to serve an everyday purpose in the meantime. It can be moved around and set up in different ways for disaster relief, but this takes time. For example, a pandemic is a disaster that may require more relief to treat a larger amount of people, but its slower escalation over weeks or months means that it can rely on the adaptable infrastructure to formulate and assist in supplying large-scale relief, like temporary hospital extensions. Similar time disasters might deal with displacement, like refugee influxes or bushfire evacuees. Shorter disasters, like terrorist attacks or extreme heat waves under a power outage, cannot be afforded the same time adaptable infrastructure might take to be reconfigured. These disasters must rely on permanent infrastructure that already exists and need only be switched on. My proposal will be coordinated by a government-run app, CitySafe, which will provide active warnings in the forecast or alert of disasters and notifications as to where relief will be configured. Members of the public can preview these site setups from the app, while employees of government agencies such as the Victoria State Emergency Service, Melbourne Water, the Department of Health and Human Services, or Victoria Police can view embedded layers of instructions on an individual piece-by-piece level to conduct the physical setup itself. Taking two of the disasters at opposite ends of the timescale, a heatwave and a pandemic, let's examine how this plays out in either scenario. Members of the public receive an alert of a forecasted heatwave. The City of Melbourne's heatwave response plan from 2018 currently estimates up to 300,000 people could become stranded in the city if a power outage occurred during a heatwave, following a breakdown of air conditioning and public transport. The CitySafe corridor should therefore provide cooler temperature respites, water access, and temporary accommodation facilities. This will be done through three strategic layers of heat relief: vegetation, permanent infrastructure, and accessibility to the corridor's resources. To start on vegetation, parks are natural destinations for their thermal comfort, but even the colonial parks in the corridor like Carlton and Fitzroy Gardens need to be future-proof with new tree species, as many of the existing ones are suffering from increasing climate stresses and reaching the ends of their lifespans. Planting and replacing with young species now that will be tolerant to a 0.8 degrees Celsius increase by 2040 and a 3 degree increase by 2090 will ensure a thicker and cooler canopy cover that can offer heat resilience to large capacities of people. However, in the event of being stranded in the city, temporary accommodation, food, toilets, shelter and drinking fountains are also needed. The corridor already encompasses these, so the infrastructure doesn't need to provide them itself, but rather ensure people can still access them after a breakdown of transport and power. Not everyone can always afford to walk long distances in high-degree temperatures. So looking at where Melbourne's primary water mains are, misters will be permanently installed into the corridor streetscapes at these locations, not just to provide drinking water and immediate heat relief, but also to act as an enablement of safe movement. They counteract the breakdown of transport and air conditioning by activating the corridor into a cohesive passage, allowing people to safely travel with thermal comfort and regular water access to reach necessary temporary accommodation, food, and medical care. The water mains also allow for easier setup of extra portable toilets at select sites to accommodate the increase of people, and these particular sites can also be used for other larger disaster setups too. So let's examine a longer term one, like a pandemic. The public are first notified that adaptable infrastructure will be used to set up extra hospital extensions at these same particular locations within the corridor. These hubs were chosen for their open space, while still preserving the most essential ambulance paths to existing emergency bays, and also still being within close proximity of other essential services. Setting up concentrated hubs means that resources, equipment and staff will be used more efficiently. The temporary and permanent can also fuse here. The streetscape misters can now be fitted with disinfectant to become street sanitisers or assist in the decontamination process of entering these temporary medical sites. Here, at these sites, CitySafe app instructions will outline the specified setups for the government agency employees, so they can set in place the adaptable infrastructure to create hospitals with extensions with circulation routes, general wards, emergency bays, reception, water closets, labs, intensive care units, and decontamination bays. And while infrastructure may be useful in a pandemic scenario as utilities of spatial control and designation, it can also be used to shift tightly controlled green spaces into new transformative areas, particularly in situations of lockdown where the public, particularly in the high-density CBD, may be presented with very limited public space opportunities. Users will also become familiarised with the infrastructure itself on a day-to-day basis, with CitySafe similarly providing notifications of events and more everyday applications such as temporary museum exhibits, park pavilions, music festivals, event spaces and white nights in our post-COVID experience.